Is Western civilization on the edge of collapse? Or will we take the next great leap in ethics, law, and science to carry us into a new age of prosperity? This may come down to one simple question. How do we get people to cooperate? This is Natural Law, the science of cooperation. Now, you might hear the word cooperation and think that sounds like some sort of touchy-feely Marxist utopian Age of Aquarius love fest. Let's all just be friends and cooperate.
Can we all get along? Can we get along?
Well, that's not exactly what I'm talking about. But the fact can't be denied that cooperation results in disproportionate wealth, disproportionate prosperity, disproportionate returns on investment than individual efforts alone. Through a division of labor, I help you, you help me, we cooperate, and we're all better off. The benefits can't be understated. But we're not just talking about some nicey-nice cooperation where I give everything to you and you give nothing back to me in return. We're talking about cooperation within the limits of suppressing parasitism and predation. If you've seen my previous video on predators, parasites, and producers, then you'll be familiar with these 3 different human survival strategies. Creating the conditions where people cooperate is not as easy as it seems. We are animals, and we respond to incentives. If there's an opportunity to cheat, someone's gonna cheat. If there's an opportunity to lie, someone's gonna lie. If there's an opportunity to steal, someone's gonna steal. If productive cooperation is going to exist, predation and parasitism must be suppressed. So, how do we suppress parasitism and force people into cooperation? Introducing Natural Law. Before we get into the details, let me welcome you to my channel. In these videos, I share my understanding of the science of propertarianism. If you want to learn more about it, go to propertarianism.com and of course hit the bell and subscribe for more videos like these. The term natural law has had many meanings throughout history and has become corrupted over time. A simple explanation is that there are 2 kinds of law. Natural law, which is universal and applies to everyone at all times, and man-made law or positive law, which is arbitrary or particular to a certain situation or culture. But natural law can not only be observed in human behavior, but it can be deduced from basic laws of nature. That's why we call it natural law. Oh. Let's think of law as the constraints on what is possible. We have physical laws, like gravity or thermodynamics. We have the laws of nature that govern human action. For instance, man must acquire resources or he will die. There's no changing that. That's just the way it is. And likewise, man must defend the resources that he acquires. These are observable characteristics of nature. And finally, in order to create disproportionate returns in acquiring resources, man must act cooperatively. Predation is a means of acquiring resources, but it depletes the prey, and so will always be limited. Parasitism is similarly a survival strategy, but it also depletes the host upon which one is a parasite. Only cooperation is generative and productive. So in order for man to generate a disproportionate acquisition of resources, he must cooperate. And not only that, he has to preserve and protect and extend cooperation into the future. He must protect the culture of cooperation. This brings us to natural law, which are the incentives constraining human action to force people into cooperation. And the only incentive for choosing cooperation over non-cooperation is the one law of reciprocity. Think about it. If we're all playing by the rules and then somebody cheats, then what incentive is still there to play by the rules? Cheating and parasitism undermines the trust which supports future cooperation. So what do we do with these cheaters? Punish violations of reciprocity. And because man must acquire and defend resources for his survival, there are bound to be disputes. When one person imposes costs on another, there's bound to be retaliation. So natural law serves as the science of dispute resolution. By tests of reciprocity, we can end the cycle of retaliation. And now for some history. Going back as far as the Bronze Age, the Indo-Europeans developed a survival strategy as violent martial raiders. This was a strategy that required successful cooperation. It was a risky business, and anyone who was lying or cheating would impose tremendous costs on the entire group. They had to follow the rule of reciprocity. They gave their oath of reciprocal insurance. I've got your back if you've got mine. The Greeks further developed natural law, with Aristotle often being called the father of natural law. They put forth the idea that there were customs, which varied from one place to another, and then there was nature, which was universal. Universal law is the law of nature. For there really is, as everyone to some extent divines, a natural justice and injustice that is binding on all men, even on those who have no association or covenant with each other. Meanwhile, the Stoics thought of the natural order of the universe as rational and purposeful. Therefore, a rational man would live in accord with this purposeful order. These early philosophers spread their influence to the Romans. As Cicero states, "There is indeed a law, right reason, which is in accordance with nature, existing in all, unchangeable, eternal." Fast forward to the 13th century, and St. Thomas Aquinas is yet another name who must be mentioned in any discussion of natural law. He was able to restore many of the ideas of Aristotle, suggesting that natural law was something that could be perceived by any rational person, even if they had never come in contact with divine law or revelation. And so it was that with each generation, man was striving forward to understand the natural laws that governed human cooperation. Much of this was simply developed in the common law, which was not something derived from reason, but simply by practicing the science of dispute resolution. It was a law that was developing and improving with time. Around the 17th century, the Enlightenment thinkers began to take a new look at natural law. They were seeking an empirical and rational understanding of law as derived from the state of nature. There was a shift towards natural rights and an insistence that natural law superseded any sort of human authority. These Enlightenment thinkers had a huge influence on Thomas Jefferson and the Founding Fathers. They're echoed in the words of the Declaration of Independence, based on the natural rights of life, liberty, and property. The moral duties which exist between individual and individual in a state of nature accompany them into a state of society, their maker not having released them from those duties on their forming themselves into a nation. Development of natural law continued through the 20th century, despite the nearly overwhelming rise of pseudoscience. Various schools of libertarianism took property rights as the basis for all dispute resolution, thus reducing the social sciences, law, and economics to property rights. Murray Rothbard builds on this idea of natural law as science. The world, in fact, consists of a myriad number of observable things or entities. The observable behavior of each of these entities is the law of their natures, and this law includes what happens as a result of the interactions. The complex that we build up of these laws may be termed the structure of natural law. And that brings us to the 21st century, where we face an opportunity for a new scientific revolution of ethics, economics, and law. The unique contribution of Kurt Doolittle and the Proprietarian Institute has been to create the language for putting natural law into scientific terms. A strictly constructed law for incentivizing cooperation. In this view, ethics, morality, law, economics, and the social sciences are within the realm of the science of cooperation, and everything else is literature, justification, and propaganda. So you might ask, can law really be this scientific? Whereas the laws of physics describe the movement of bodies, natural law is based on morality and ethics, discovered through the use of reason. Natural law is discovered just like scientists discover the physical laws of the natural world. The transformation of juridical philosophy to juridical science is eminently possible. Just as in any other science, it's through observation that we arrive at general rules. And when we observe human action and human cooperation, one overriding rule emerges. We call this the one law of reciprocity. Reciprocity allows for decidability in cases of dispute. But how is it measured and calculated? Decidability is measured by changes in property, hence the name propertarianism. Property is that which we invest in and defend, which are observable human actions. Property is not some divine or metaphysical right. It's not something inherent in an object, but property is a natural outcome of man's act of acquiring and defending resources and cooperating to defend those resources. Morality can be as definite as mathematics, with operations and strict definitions. And that means calculating reciprocity with regard to all known property, including externalities imposed on others, in order to resolve conflict. But let's talk about morality. We all have moral intuitions. And as a collective, our cultures develop moral norms. These norms can be justified through clever explanations, literature, myth, or philosophy. In this way, we see a progression: intuition, norm, justification. While we may all have these moral intuitions and we may live by moral norms, law does not need to be rationalized and justified according to our intuitions. Natural law, as described here, is a juridical science, not a fictional literature. Natural law is not limited by moral intuitions, moral norms, justifications, or something that we all agree to. Natural law is a science, and this science will be the scientific revolution of the 21st century. The history of law is a history of our attempts to resolve conflict. But the logic of law and cooperation is no longer subjective and undecidable. It is objectively decidable regardless of norm, culture, tradition, or legislation. So here it is, the one law of reciprocity. Thou shalt not impose costs upon the demonstrated interests of others, either directly or indirectly, where those interests were obtained by settlement or reciprocal exchange. Therefore, thou shalt limit thy words and deeds and the words and deeds of others to reciprocity, the productive, fully informed, warranted, voluntary exchange of interests, free of imposition of costs upon the demonstrated interests of others. From this scientific perspective, law is not handed down from an authority above. Rather, judges become the new scientists, discovering violations of the law of reciprocity. This judge-discovered law, as mentioned earlier, is known as common law. Common law is the record of the arguments by which we decided past conflicts. This scientific law ends judicial activism, interpretation, and circumvention of the law. Reciprocity, then, also limits the construction of legislation itself. While we often think of legislation and law as the same thing, legislation could be considered more like a contract between the people with regard to the commons. And legislation is still subject to that same rule of reciprocity. In short, neither judges, nor legislators, nor the president himself can invent rules that violate this law of reciprocity. While on the other hand, it is possible for judges to discover new violations of the law of reciprocity, new innovations of parasitism and predation. And the advantage of this judge-discovered law is rapid adaptability. As soon as a new innovation is discovered, it can immediately be stomped out. Additionally, any legislation that the court finds is violating reciprocity can be quickly removed. This adaptability leads to rapid advance. To recap, what is natural law? A fully decidable universal law of ethics. And what is the law of ethics? The law of cooperation and conflict resolution. And what is this law of cooperation and conflict resolution? Reciprocity. Natural law has followed this thread, from the early Indo-Europeans to the Greeks and Romans, Germanic and British empirical common law, building a formal logic wherein all rights are reduced to property rights. Law is strictly constructed from the one law of reciprocity with regard to all known property. And the law of reciprocity prohibits the imposition of costs, including costs that would provoke retaliation and decrease cooperation. Whereas cooperation creates prosperity and a division of labor, impediments to cooperation must be suppressed. As we've seen, natural law is the category of human cooperation. It is the logic of human cooperation. It is the empirical observation of human cooperation. And it is the science, the continuous rapid advancement of human cooperation. This one law of reciprocity is meritocratic, rewarding those who contribute with cooperative productive exchange, leading to an ever-improving, innovating, and adapting eugenic civilization. This science of judge-discovered natural law continues the long Western tradition. This is the tradition which made the West great and dragged humanity out of ignorance, suffering, poverty, and disease. This is the tradition which, if we can maintain it, will take us on the next great leap of Western excellence. Thank you for watching, and check out the full library for more videos like this. And of course, visit propertarianism.com for more information.